Hey guys, Chris of the Polish Geek and welcome to another movie review, probably the last review before I go to Paris to visit my sister and her kids. I wasn't even planning on seeing the Marvels, but oh well, that's what you have to do when you have a YouTube channel. And was the movie any good? Of course not, and it's not like I even expected it to be any good in the first place, and in all honesty, I actually didn't hate it as much as I thought I would hate it, in all honesty. And I still think it was actually better than Thor Love and Thunder, Wakanda Forever, and certainly much better than its predecessor Captain Marvel. Still a pretty bad movie, but certainly much better than all those. And as I said, much better than its predecessor. Captain Marvel is still probably the worst Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. The Marvels still very much suffers from pretty bad filmmaking, bland and boring characters, as well as actually several interesting ideas that ultimately don't go anywhere. And the perfect example is that in this movie, Captain Marvel, Miss Marvel, and this other character, Monica Rambeau, I believe was her name, they start swapping bodies around, and that plot element at first felt actually pretty interesting, especially that I kind of like the idea of stories where characters start swapping bodies with each other. That's actually a pretty interesting trope I really like in fiction, but ultimately it didn't go anywhere, and it felt like more like a pretty lame excuse to get all those three characters together and literally nothing else. That's literally what this plot point felt like to me. And it also comes to the biggest plot point of the movie that I thought actually is the worst thing. Like, a really cool idea that ultimately has been terribly executed and didn't go anywhere. Like, because Captain Marvel is actually very much responsible for a lot of movies' conflict. We learn a lot in the backstory. I believe it was probably in the Captain Marvel movie that she has largely been responsible for the Civil War on the Kree world because of something that she did. And like Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, has always been like one of my least favorite characters in the MCU. She was always so self-centered and boring, and that plot point actually where she does start feeling guilty about it, that could lead to some really interesting storytelling and interesting character development for her, and actually could her make a far more likable and interesting character. That was a pretty interesting idea that, as I said, could very easily make Captain Marvel far more likable for me and very much provide a huge character development from her. But nope, this idea isn't really dwelt on all that much, and I didn't really feel Captain Marvel changing any other than showing a little bit of regret for what she did. I can't say she's particularly a more likable character by the film's end, quite the opposite. And the main villain is just terrible. Like, she's like literally one of the worst Marvel villains I ever seen. Like, I don't even remember her name, but she has technically a backstory because that she wanted her own people, the Kree, to survive, but then ultimately nothing is done with that, and she just turns into a one-note villain hell-bent on distraction, probably even worse than Malekith from Thor: The Dark World. Like, I generally think Marvel has been overdoing this with sympathetic villains, and I really wish it started more doing villains that are actually evil, but this is basically the worst of both worlds, because she is neither sympathetic despite being given a clear sympathetic motivation and backstory, and as an evil villain she doesn't work either, and the performance of the actress is just terrible. So yeah, this movie is by far one of the worst Marvel villains ever. And the main characters are pretty bland and forgettable. Like, for example, as I already been talking about Captain Marvel and how this movie could give her perfect character development and make her more likable, but no, she's still as unlikable as she was in all her previous appearances. And on the other hand, Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, while she's certainly much more likable than Captain Marvel, ultimately she's just pretty annoying. Like, the show Miss Marvel, the first 2 episodes of Miss Marvel were actually pretty interesting, and I was kind of hooked in, but then, like most of the Marvel Cinematic Universe TV shows, the show ended up pretty bland, boring, and forgettable. And then there is third character, Monica, who is also pretty boring, and I can't really name anything about her. I guess the best character in the movie was Nick Fury, because come on, we all love Nick Fury, but even he was portrayed inconsistently in some parts. Like, he had a few cool moments, but overall, I even think Nick Fury wasn't really done justice here. In conclusion, can't say I'm as angry as the Marvels or some other people seems to be, but maybe that's because ultimately I think Marvel Cinematic Universe is just a shadow of its former self at this point. Yes, we had magnificent Spider-Man No Way Home and ultra magnificent Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 that admittedly are some of my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. But that's pretty much it, and those I just consider like epilogues after Avengers Endgame, because ultimately I can't really say any of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies that has been that good. Like Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, I was much more forgiving of it than most people seem to be, and I did give a movie a positive review and was kind of entertained by it. But ultimately, in contrast to Spider-Man No Way Home and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and all the movies pre-Endgame, of course, those movies I could rewatch and still have a great time, while even Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, at this point, I pretty much forgot a lot about the movie, even if I actually enjoyed it on my first viewing and gave it a positive review. So, yeah, the Marvels is just basically reflects perfectly what his Marvel Cinematic Universe has become. Ultimately, The Marvels is a pretty bad movie with very weak characters, weak story, terrible villain, and pretty boring action scenes, and some good ideas that ultimately don't go anywhere. So, I personally think people should at least at this point give up on Marvel Cinematic Universe and just remember the glory days. I'll probably keep having to watch those movies so that the rest of you don't have to. But this is the point we are at this point. And thank you for checking out this video. Press the like button. Please subscribe to this channel. And I'm going to Paris, and I will actually see Napoleon there. So I'll talk to you soon when I get back from Paris, and I'll finally review Napoleon for you. Talk to you then. Bye.